every job in this industry is built on someone's work. The question this week is who actually gets to say yes to how that work gets used. This is Empath, hosted by Carolyn DeClue and Beau DeClue, where creativity meets strategy and creative careers are built with intention. New episodes every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Empath, feel the creativity.
This is Empath, and I'm Carolyn DeClue.
And I'm Beau DeClue. Feel the creativity.
This episode is brought to you by Neon Alchemy. Story is how companies become human. We handle that part. Link in the show notes. New episodes every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Find us wherever you listen.
All right, we have to do it. Everybody's been waiting for us to do it.
The AI episode.
Yep, the AI episode.
We held out a long time.
6 episodes, to be exact. I think that's a personal record for this industry.
And I want to say up front, we're not doing the version of this conversation where we tell you if your job is safe. Nobody actually knows that, and anyone who tells you they do, well...
What we can tell you is the question everyone's asking is the wrong one. Is AI coming for my job? Isn't actually answerable this week. But who consented to the data that trained the thing? That one has an answer, and it's not a good one.
That's the real spine of today, consent. Who gave it, who didn't, and who's pretending a system exists to protect it when there's no enforcement behind it at all.
Here's the part that got me. There's now a tool that lets you set consent terms for your own face and voice, which sounds like a win until you realize the only way to use it is to hand a third party a detailed profile of yourself so it can protect you from a different third party.
So the fix for the problem has the same issue as the problem.
That's exactly the issue. And the part that should bother people more than it does, none of it's enforceable. It's a registry, not a law. Companies can just not look at it.
Which is the thing I keep coming back to. We've spent 6 episodes talking about systems that were built to protect people and quietly stopped doing that. This might be the cleanest example we've covered yet.
Built with good intentions.
Yes, but running on no teeth at all.
This is one where my film background and my magic background actually agree with each other again. Both of those worlds run on somebody controlling exactly what you see and when. The difference is whether the person doing the controlling ever asked your permission first. That's it. That's the entire dividing line we're going to keep running into today.
So here's where we're going. Industry Pulse, the actual numbers on jobs at risk. The part of the data that complicates the panic more than it confirms it.
Deep Dive gets into where consent actually breaks down inside the training data, long before a model ever ships an output. Career strategy is what you personally do about credit, consent, and ownership starting now, not after it's already a mess.
Industry Voice, we're getting into Cate Blanchett's Human Consent Registry, and an interview with Sony's head of AI governance that I haven't stopped thinking about since I read it.
And we've got a new invisible move that's going to change how you look at every contract you've ever signed.
I'm excited for this one.
Me too.
Let's get into it.
You're listening to Empath, where creativity meets strategy and the work stays worth doing. What's changing? What's staying? What actually matters? This is Industry Pulse.
Okay, numbers. Let's start with the one everyone's already heard because we can't do this episode without addressing it. The World Economic Forum's projection. Roughly 92 million jobs displaced globally by 2030, but about 170 million new roles created in the same window, for a net gain of around 78 million jobs.
Which sounds like good news dressed up as a headline.
Yeah, it really does, and technically it's not wrong, but it's the kind of statistic that's true in an aggregate and useless to any one individual person. Net positive globally tells you nothing about whether your specific job is one of the 92 million or one of the 170 million.
Right, nobody experiences net gain. You experience your job.
Exactly. So let's get more specific to us, because the general labor numbers actually undersell what's happening in creative work and oversell it at the same time. Both, which is the whole complicated part.
Okay, let's hear undersell first.
There's research out of Cornell looking at freelance labor platforms, not surveys, not sentiment, actual job postings and actual hiring. Since 2022, demand for AI substitutable skills like writing and translation has dropped somewhere between 20 and 50%, with writing jobs specifically down about 30%.
That's not a slow decline, that's a cliff.
And it's not just writing. Software and web development postings are down 21%, engineering down 10% on the same platforms. And this part's going to hit close to home for anyone doing visual work. Image generation tools have driven double-digit demand declines in graphic design and 3D modeling.
So if you're a freelancer in one of those lanes, the WEF's comforting net positive number does not describe your year.
It really doesn't. Freelancers in AI-exposed writing work have seen a 2% monthly decline in job volume and a 5% drop in monthly earnings since generative AI went mainstream, every month compounding.
All right, what's the other half?
here's where it gets genuinely strange. There's a separate piece of research, a broad occupational risk model looking at hundreds of job categories, and when they score creativity and arts as a category, it comes back with a risk score of about 4%. Lower than education, lower than almost every white-collar category they measured. Management came even lower at 3%.
Hold on, 4% risk next to a platform showing a 30% collapse in writing demand? Those can't both be true.
Except they can, and figuring out why is the whole point of this segment. Those models are scoring occupations as categories, graphic designer as a job title. They're not looking inside the job at the task level.
So the category survives even while half the actual tasks inside it are disappearing.
That's it. What's collapsing isn't graphic design as a profession, it's the commodity layer inside it. Stock style social templates, product description copy, basic logo variations, the stuff that was always closer to a template than a creative decision. That's the 30%. The high judgment work sitting inside the same job title, brand strategy, art direction, the stuff that requires a point of view, that's not what's cratering.
Which means the job title survives on paper while the actual day-to-day of it gets hollowed out from the inside?
Right. And here's the number that actually proves the split is real, because it shows up directly in pay. There's a 2026 industry survey of working creatives, and it found the market has bifurcated. Commodity creative rates are collapsing, but strategic and premium creative roles are up 15 to 30%. Same industry, opposite directions, at the same time.
So the panic and the opportunity are happening to two different halves of the same profession simultaneously.
Which is why, is AI coming for creative jobs? Was never going to have one answer. It already has two, and they're moving apart from each other, not converging.
Here's a number that bugs me more than the job loss ones. 81.6% of digital marketers believe content writers specifically are going to lose their jobs to AI.
But that's perception, not the Cornell data.
Right. That's the people doing the hiring. That's not AI replaced writers. That's the people who hire writers have already decided AI replaced writers, which becomes self-fulfilling whether the tools are actually good enough yet or not.
That's a really dark mechanism. The belief does the displacing before the capability even catches up to it.
Let's talk about how that fear is actually distributed, because it's not even. There's a 2026 survey putting public sentiment at 63% of Americans believing AI will decrease job availability overall, and 45% expecting a negative economic effect versus just 16% who expect a positive one.
That's a real gap to notice, because it suggests a lot of career decisions right now, whether to specialize, whether to switch fields entirely, are being made off the mood, not the data underneath it. So the mood is bleak, almost 3-1.
But here's the part that should complicate that mood, not confirm it. Nearly 40% of employers are anticipating some workforce reduction where AI automates tasks this year. That's a real number, but it's also well under half. Most employers are not in that camp.
So public fear is outrunning even the employers who are supposedly doing the cutting?
By a wide margin. And there's a gender angle in this data that doesn't get talked about enough in creative circles. In high-income countries, women's jobs sit at roughly 9.6% top AI risk, compared to 3.2% for men.
Oh, that's a 3 times gap.
And creative industries, publishing, design, marketing, skew female in a lot of the roles sitting closest to that commodity layer we just described. So the bifurcation we talked about, strategic work up, commodity work down, it's not landing evenly across the people doing the work either.
Which means the industry is fine on average was never going to be true for everyone inside it, even within creative work.
Right. Now here's the other side of the complication, because it's not all downward pressure. Roles adjacent to this shift are actually growing fast. Software developers, for instance, are projected for a 17.9% employment increase from 2023 to 2033, which tells you something about where the adaptability actually sits.
It's not creative versus technical. It's routine versus judgment, wherever that line happens to fall in your job. And that's a more useful way to audit your own work than asking whether your job title sounds safe on paper.
Ask what percentage of your actual week is routine versus judgment driven, not what your business card says.
That's a different exercise than most people expect it to be. Sit down and track a full week. Most creatives find the split isn't what they assumed going in. Usually more routine work is hiding in there than they'd have guessed. And sometimes more judgment work too, buried inside tasks that look routine on the surface.
Which means the audit itself is the useful part, not just the conclusion you land on.
Right, because once you can see the split, you know which half of your own job to protect and build language around it, instead of guessing based on how the role feels from the outside.
Exactly, and that line is moving, not fixed, which is the most honest way to describe 2026 so far. Not a wave that's hitting everyone the same way, but a redrawing of where the safe and unsafe zones are inside every single role, creative or not. So where does that leave us? Commodity work, disappearing fast. High judgment work, appreciating fast. a hiring class that's acting on the fear before the data's even settled, and a risk that isn't landing evenly across who's doing the work in the first place.
Which brings us to the actual question. And it's not, will AI take your job? It's, what did the AI get trained on to be good enough to take the commodity half in the first place? Because none of this bifurcation happens without a model that's already fluent in stock photography, template copy, logo conventions, whatever the commodity layer of your craft looks like.
One more thing before we move off of this, because I think it explains why the mood feels so heavy right now, even for people whose specific work isn't disappearing. There's a broader burnout picture sitting in plain view. Creative professionals are reporting burnout rates near 70% this year, and about half say they feel less financially secure than they did 12 months ago.
So even the people in the appreciating half of the split aren't necessarily feeling appreciated.
Right, because job security and financial security aren't the same thing, and pay hasn't caught up to the pressure for a lot of people, even when their specific role is holding steady or growing.
Which is worth noting before we move on. This segment's been about data, but the data's landing on actual people, and the anxiety is real, even where numbers say it shouldn't be, at least not yet.
And fluent means it learned that from somewhere.
It learned from work, somebody's work, collected in almost every case without anyone asking first.
Which is where the story has to go next.
The industry keeps changing. The patterns underneath it don't. This is Empath. The tools, the systems, the way work actually gets made. This is Deep Dive.
Alright, so we ended Industry Pulse on the idea that the commodity layer of creative work is actually what's collapsing, and that it's collapsing because the model got good enough to replace it. This segment is about the part right before that. Where did the model get good at your job in the first place?
The training data.
The training data. And I want to walk through this because most coverage treats it as an abstract ethics debate, and it's a very concrete workflow question with real tools attached right now.
Okay, start at the beginning. How does a model actually end up trained on somebody's specific portfolio?
Scraping mostly. Research surveying this space found major models trained on huge volumes of data pulled straight from the artist's portfolio sites. Places like Pinterest, ArtStation, without the artist ever being asked. The default was, if it's publicly visible, it's fair game to ingest.
Nobody opted in? There was no form to fill out?
No form, no notification, no compensation. And here's the mechanism that made it possible at scale. The default setting wasn't opt out. Your work is automatically included unless you research and find the right registry and actively remove yourself.
Which flips the entire burden. Instead of a company having to ask permission, you have to hunt down where you were already taken and beg to be excluded.
And I want to be specific about how hard that actually is, because just opt out sounds simple until you try it. There's research literally examining the shortfalls of opt out as a model, and the finding is, it creates massive administrative overhead. Copyrighted work is everywhere online. You cannot realistically opt out of every place your work appears, and there's no single registry covering every AI system.
So it's not one form, it's dozens forever. And you have to know they exist in the first place.
And it gets messier, because there isn't even one standard for how you'd signal don't train on this in the first place. There's a whole family of competing protocols right now. The old robots.txt file, which was never built for this, robots meta tags, xrobots tag headers, the new proposals trying to actually add AI-specific preferences, things called learners.txt, content signals, and AI preferences extension, AI.txt, TDMREP.
That's a lot of file names for please don't take my work.
And here's the problem baked into that list. Most of the older ones, the ones actually in wide use, don't even have an option to express AI training preferences specifically. They were built for search engines, not generative models. So a huge amount of web is technically protected by a protocol that was never designed to say no to what's actually happening to it.
So even the technical layer is running on infrastructure that predates the problem?
Exactly. And on the regulatory side, there's finally some real weight showing up. California's AI Transparency Act took effect this January, and it adds a genuine legal backstop to the platform side, not just a voluntary ask.
Let's actually walk through what happens to a piece of your work once it's been scraped, because I don't think people picture the mechanics of it. It's not stored somewhere with your name on it, sitting in a folder waiting to be traced.
Right. It gets absorbed into the training process itself. Millions of images or pieces of text get run through the model, and what comes out on the other side isn't a copy of any single piece. It's a set of statistical patterns learned across all of them.
Which is exactly why just prove your work was used is so much harder than it sounds. There's no file to point to afterward. There's no folder to search.
And that's precisely why chain of title has to happen before ingestion, not after. Once your work's been absorbed into those patterns, there's no clean way to extract it back out again, even if a court eventually agrees it shouldn't have been there in the first place.
So every opt-out registry, every robots.txt block, every cloaking tool, all of it is racing against a door that closes the moment a model's already been trained.
Which is the honest and comfortable core of this whole segment. Prevention is really the only lever that fully works. Everything after that is just cleanup, and cleanup of this specific case is often not even technically possible.
Which is going to sound very familiar once we get to industry voice later.
No spoilers, but yes, same pattern, different scale. We'll be right back with the tools that actually work today, and after that, this week's Invisible Move.
Your real workflow isn't the one on paper. It's the one that holds when the clock is running. Thank you for listening to Empath.
Okay, back. Real tools. 3 layers people are actually using right now. Dataset level, technical, legal. None complete alone, but stacked together they shrink your exposure.
Dataset level first.
Registries like Spawning's opt-out list, which flags non-consenting work and forwards it to dataset holders like LAION, who've agreed to pull flagged images. Still opt-out architecture, but it's something.
Technical layers, the one I actually find interesting, because it's the only piece an individual controls without asking anyone's permission. Robots.txt blocks against known AI crawlers, and cloaking tools like Glaze and Nightshade that alter an image at the file level so it confuses what a model learns from it, even if it gets scraped anyway.
Friction and a paper trail, not a wall. It won't stop someone determined, but it raises the cost, and it proves you said no.
And legals where the real movement is, UMG versus UDO established that artists have to consent before their work trains a model. Default flipped. No permission. No use. That logic's already showing up in a books case, and oversees a coalition including Studio Ghibli's rights holders push the same argument against a major AI company.
Let's actually sit with the Studio Ghibli case for a second, because the argument they made is worth understanding on its own, not just as a headline. Under the law they were arguing from, copying creative work from machine learning can be treated the same as any other unauthorized copy. Not a special carve-out for AI, just you copied protected work and you didn't ask.
Which cuts straight through a lot of the industry's own framing. AI companies have spent years arguing that training is somehow categorically different from copying. That case says not necessarily.
And it's producing real deals, not just payouts. Warner's case against Suno settled into a licensing partnership where artists control how their name and voice show up in AI output.
Here's my skepticism though. Has the biggest player actually caught up to that shift?
No, and that's the honest wrinkle. A major opt-out tool one of the largest AI companies promised in 2024 still doesn't exist in 2026. For visual artists and writers specifically, robots.txt and Hope is still most of what's on the table.
So the workflow reality is split. Music has precedent and real deals. Everything else is still catching up.
And that split is worth remembering the next time someone tells you AI training is a solved legal question, because it genuinely depends on the discipline you're standing in and when you ask.
Music, you've got real precedent behind you. Visual art or text, you're mostly building your own protection from scratch. One contract at a time, until the law catches up.
Exactly. And I want to give people one more practical thing before we move on, because it's easy to hear 3 layers, none of them complete, and just feel defeated by it. A specific piece of contract language photographers are already using, and it's worth knowing even before we get to career strategy. A short version that says deliverables aren't approved for AI use or AI training, and a longer version that also covers metadata harvesting and biometric identification.
So even without the industry-wide fix, there's a version of the technical and legal layers you can build yourself, one contract at a time.
Which is a smaller, slower version of exactly what the big legal cases are doing at scale. You're just doing it for your own chain instead of waiting for someone else's lawsuit to set the precedent for you.
Alright, that's the workflow reality. Now, the part that ties it all together.
Which is exactly the landscape Industry Voice is about to walk into. For now, the invisible move.
You saw it, you felt it, but you didn't notice it. This is the invisible move.
Every deal that actually protects someone, the contract that holds up when it's tested, the licensing agreement nobody ever has to fight about later, has something working underneath it that's never named out loud. Today's invisible move is chain of title.
This one's mine. I get a lead for once.
All yours.
Chain of title is a film and entertainment law term. Before a studio can finance or distribute anything, someone has to prove the unbroken paper trail of who owns the rights to the underlying story, going all the way back. Every option, every assignment, every signature. If there's a gap anywhere in that chain, no insurer will touch the production because ownership can't actually be verified.
So it's not about whether the story's good, it's about whether anyone can prove who's allowed to tell it.
Exactly. And a broken chain doesn't announce itself. Everything can look fine on the surface. The deal gets made, the movie gets shot. And then years later, someone surfaces with a real claim because the chain was never actually clean.
Which is precisely the AI training data problem we just spent 10 minutes on.
It's the same shape exactly. A model's output is only as legitimate as the consent underneath that data that trained it. And right now, industry-wide, that chain is either broken or genuinely unverifiable. Nobody can produce the paper trail proving the training data was actually cleared.
Let's pull this into other fields, because it's not just film. Music has the same discipline, sample clearance. Every sample in a released track has to be licensed back to its original source, or the whole song is legally radioactive.
Publishing has it too. Any quote, any excerpt, any adapted material needs a documented clearance, or a publisher won't print it.
And it's even in software. Every open source dependency in a code base carries its own license, and if one of those licenses is incompatible with how you're using it, that's a broken link in your chain, whether anyone notices at launch or not.
Journalism has its own version too, and it's one people don't usually think of as a chain of title issue. Sourcing. Every fact in a piece is supposed to trace back to something, a document, a named source, an on-record quote. When that chain breaks, when a fact can't actually be traced back to where it came from, that's not a style problem. That's the same structural failure, just wearing a press badge instead of a producer credit.
And games have it in asset licensing. Every sound effect, every font, every third-party engine plugin in a shipped title needs its own clean rights trail, or the whole product is exposed the moment someone actually checks.
The invisible part is that a clean chain of title feels like nothing. Nobody notices the paperwork when it's done right. You only notice it when it's missing, and by then, it's usually a lawsuit.
So the practical takeaway, whatever field you're in, ask what your chain of title actually looks like for the things you're building on. For reference, your samples, your training data if you're using AI tools yourself. If you can't trace it back cleanly, that gap doesn't go away just because nobody's asked about it yet.
And here's the part I'd add from the production side specifically. On a film set, chain of title isn't something you check once at the start and forget about. It gets re-verified at every single stage: financing, insurance, distribution. Sometimes, even years later when a project gets sold again. It's not a box you check, it's a standard you maintain.
Which is a useful way to think about your own work too. Not, did I clear this once, but could I still prove this cleanly if someone asked me a year from now?
And that question gets harder the longer a project sits around. Emails get deleted, freelancers you worked with move on and stop responding. The reference you swore you'd document later never gets documented, because later never actually arrives on its own.
Which is exactly why the discipline has to live at the moment of creation, not get reconstructed after the fact under pressure.
Because reconstructing it after the fact is basically what a legal team does during a lawsuit. Interviews, subpoenaed records, sworn statements, all just to rebuild something that could have been 3 lines in a project file from the start.
Which cost real money too on top of everything else. Legal reconstruction isn't cheap for anyone involved, the creative or the company defending the claim.
So the invisible move, in practice, is closer to a habit than a document. Every time you start something new, ask where it came from, and write the answer down somewhere. You'll actually find it again. It just waits.
That's the invisible move.
A clean story starts with a clean claim to tell it. That was the invisible move, only on Empath. Your portfolio, your position, your next move. This is career strategy.
Right. Everything we've covered so far has been industry level. Numbers, tools, legal cases. This is the part where it gets personal. What do you actually do this week about credit, consent, and ownership?
Start with the thing that surprised me most in the research. Photographers are already doing this at scale.
They are, and it's pretty recent. There's a specific clause circulating right now through photographer networks, and the short version is just one line. Deliverables not approved for AI use and/or AI training.
That's it? One sentence added to a contract?
That's the short version. There's a longer variant too that also restricts machine learning applications, metadata harvesting, and biometric identification specifically. And it's not a suggestion anymore. Posts sharing this language are getting thousands of saves because working photographers are bookmarking it to actually use.
Saves, not just likes? That's people planning to act on it, not just nodding along.
Exactly the distinction. And here's why it's spreading so fast. Late last year, over 500 freelance photographers signed a collective letter opposing a major publication's new freelance contract because that contract's structure, combined with the publication's existing AI licensing deals, could have allowed their photos to train AI models without separate consent or pay.
So this isn't hypothetical anxiety. There was an actual contract on the table that would have done exactly that if nobody pushed back.
Right. And they caught it in the language before it became normal. That's the first takeaway for anybody listening. Read what you signed specifically for AI provisions, because the boilerplate from even 2 years ago doesn't cover what a contract can now quietly permit.
Okay, what actually goes in the clause? Give people something concrete.
3 things minimum. 1, a straight prohibition on your delivered work being used for AI training or generation, ideally in perpetuity, not just the length of the project. 2, it needs to cover the full chain, not just your direct client. The client, any agency involved, any third party who gets your work through a sublicense, because otherwise, your prohibition dies the moment your work changes hands once.
And the third?
Credit and integrity protection. Language that says no AI-generated material can alter or diminish your credited contribution without your written consent. That's specifically to prevent a situation where AI touches a scene or a piece and it still gets marketed under your name as if you made the whole thing untouched. Or worse, your name quietly disappears from something AI helped finish.
I want to flag something on the ownership side too, because it's not as simple as people assume. If you're the one using AI tools in your own workflow, illustration, design, whatever, ownership isn't one clean question. It's actually 3 separate layers that all have to line up. Your relationship with the AI tool itself, your relationship with your client, and whatever the underlying training data situation is.
Meaning you can't just write, client owns the copyright into a contract and assume that settles it.
Right. Because if a court decides the AI-generated portion isn't copyrightable at all, there's nothing there for the client to actually own in the first place, regardless of what your contract says.
Which is a strange position to be in as a working creative. You can lose income to the tool and lose clarity to the tool at the same time.
And on the ownership question, if a client pushes back and says AI output should just automatically belong to them since they paid for the project, there's a clean way to handle that conversation instead of getting defensive about it. Something like exclusive rights are doable, but AI outputs aren't guaranteed unique by the platforms themselves. So if you need exclusivity, here's what that actually requires. More human-authored editing on my end. Similarity checks before delivery, possibly narrower tool choices, and that comes with an add-on price because it's added work, not a default.
So you're not saying no, you're pricing the thing they're actually asking for.
Right, which lands very differently than just refusing.
For anyone working in entertainment, film, TV, music, there's a more formal version of all this too, because the unions got here before most freelance contracts did. SAG-AFTRA already has AI guidelines built around replica consent, meaning your likeness can't be digitally recreated without your explicit sign-off. The WGA has its own AI usage disclosure standards protecting authorship integrity on scripts. And on the brand side, current FTC guidance expects clear disclosure whenever AI materially altered sponsored content.
So if you're doing any kind of union-covered or brand partnership work, you're not starting from zero. There's already a floor.
There is, which is worth knowing because it means you can point to existing standards instead of having to invent your own language from scratch every time.
Here's the story that made this real for me, and it's worth telling because it's such a clean cautionary tale. A creator had granted a brand perpetual promotional rights to their image as part of a normal partnership deal, but that agreement never separately addressed AI cloning rights.
So the brand assumed perpetual meant perpetual, full stop.
And used an AI clone of the creator's likeness under that same agreement. One missing clause. It triggered a full PR crisis and cease and desist that dragged on for months.
Oh wow, over language that could have been added in a single sentence at signing.
That's the lesson. Likeness and voice need to be spelled out specifically. Promotional rights doesn't automatically include, you can make an AI version of me. Assume it doesn't transfer unless you explicitly negotiated it, ideally for separate compensation.
And there's a scope question that trips people up just as often as the missing clause itself. These restrictions typically need to specify how long they last and how far they reach. Perpetuity or a fixed window. Just your direct client or everyone downstream who might get access to your work through them.
Because a clause that only covers your direct client is basically decorative the moment they license your work out to somebody else.
Exactly. It needs to travel with the work. The hiring client, any agency, any platform, any third party who receives it through sublicense, all the way down the chain.
Which is, again, chain of title. It's not enough to be clean at the start. You have to stay clean at every handoff after that. And it's worth remembering this cuts both directions. If you're the one hiring other creatives or subcontracting work, you inherit whatever gaps are already in their chain the moment you bring their work into your project.
So it's not just protect your work, it's know what you're building on top of too.
Which means it's worth actually asking the people you hire the same question you'd want asked of you. Where did this come from? And can you back that up if it's ever tested?
It feels like an awkward question to put to a collaborator, until you remember it protects both of you equally.
Both halves of the same discipline.
And one more practical habit to build, separate from any single clause. Get in the habit of noting, even briefly, what tools touched a piece of work and at what stage. Something as simple as a line in your own project notes. It sounds like overkill until the day a client or a court asks you to prove exactly what was and what wasn't AI assisted, and you actually have to answer instead of a guess.
which is the individual scale version of exactly the training data provenance problem we spent the whole deep dive on.
Same fix, just size for one person's desk instead of an entire industry.
And one thing I'd add before we move past this, none of these clauses are about assuming bad faith from every client. Most of them will never test the language. It's the same logic as insurance. You're not writing it because you expect the worst case. You're writing it so the worst case doesn't end your year if it happens.
Which loops back to something regulatory too. There's now real disclosure pressure building around this. If AI materially altered content in a brand partnership, current guidance expects that to be disclosed to the audience. That's not just a contract issue between you and the brand anymore. It's becoming a transparency expectation with the public.
So being upfront about AI use in your process isn't just legally safer, it's becoming table stakes for trust with your own audience.
Which is a useful reframe to close on. Every source we found on this said some version of the same thing. Addressing AI terms openly isn't you being difficult or paranoid. Clients and brands are often relieved when a creative has already handled it because most of them don't know what they're supposed to be asking for either.
So instead of avoiding the conversation, you lead with it.
That's the career strategy here. Update your standard contract this week, not someday. Spell out AI training, cloning, and credit explicitly. Don't assume general language covers it, and treat clarity on this as a selling point, not a confrontation.
Which, not coincidentally, is exactly what chain of title is for. Prove what you own in writing before anyone else gets to assume it for you.
Full circle. Next up, listener spotlight and industry voice. 3 real interviews on exactly this fight playing out at a much bigger scale.
The scale changes. The stakes for the person in the middle of it don't.
The work matters, but direction changes everything. This is Empath. The people actually doing the work and the projects worth your attention. This is Industry Voice.
2 stories this week, and they're really one story told twice. In April, Cate Blanchett launched something called the Human Consent Registry, built with RSL Media, unveiled at the European Parliament. It's a free tool that lets anyone set a traffic light level on how AI is allowed to use their name, image, voice, likeness, and movement. Prohibited, permitted with terms, or fully permitted. A long list of Hollywood names back to that launch, and the framing everywhere has been the same line. Your identity is your IP.
Sounds like exactly what we said we needed in the opening frame.
It sounds like it, but here's the wrinkle in all of it. There's no enforcement mechanism attached to it. It's a registry, not a law. Compliance from AI companies is entirely voluntary. And to use it at all, you have to hand a third party a genuinely detailed profile of your face, voice, and movement, specifically to protect yourself from a different third party potentially misusing that same information.
So the fix and the threat are exactly the same?
That's the whole thing people are calling the consent paradox now. Protecting your identity from AI requires handing over more of your personal data. And even after you've done that, the companies you are worried about can simply choose not to look at it.
Consent infrastructure with no teeth?
That's the phrase going around, yeah. So, do you think that the visibility and star power behind this consent registry even matters since it has no actual enforcement?
I mean, I think anytime you get star power behind something, it definitely would help. Most importantly is this something that could actually be incorporated and be taken for real and seriously by the owners of the AI and the platforms that are using it?
Well, exactly, because if an AI company chooses not to recognize it, it's really invalid. It has no point to exist. I mean, maybe later down the line it could stand up in court, but for now, it's just handing them more data to scrape.
And the other thing really is it seems almost only be set up for celebrities and big names and people that you would recognize. I would think that the average person isn't going to just register, on this registry.
I mean, I agree. I think it's important that they are now seeing your face, your movement, your likeness as your intellectual property or your IP, because that's the first step towards an actual change. What I'm questioning is a voluntary system better than nothing, or does it just let AI companies point to the consent infrastructure exists argument as a cover?
I think it's good to have even voluntary because that's kind of the start of going in the right direction or in a better direction rather than just anyone can use anything and then allowing companies to scrape your information off the internet and then utilize that and nobody gets reimbursed for that.
Okay. Would you register given the data trade-off?
I mean, yeah. I mean, if it's going to be taken anyway, then there's no problem with me registering myself in this registry because at least then maybe it's on the right path to being protected eventually.
But you see it more as a chain of title. You are saying this is my IP and I choose whether to consent or not.
Right. What about you? Would you register in something like this?
No. Given the ethics around it, I still don't want to put a huge profile out of myself for somebody to scrape and potentially misuse. So I'm on the other end of that. I'm more on the fence of, I hope this goes somewhere, and when it does, I may participate, but right now, while it's still a registry, I'm too hesitant about it.
All right, my turn. This one's from Alice Xiang. She's Sony's global head of AI governance in a recent interview with AI Magazine, and her argument reframes the entire debate we've been having all episode. Her position is that the ethics failure isn't really about what AI outputs. It's about the training data underneath before a model ever ships. Most data sets get scraped without consent, without the people in them even knowing, without compensation, and that bakes bias and legal exposure into a model from day one.
Which is exactly the chain of title problem from Deep Dive.
Word for word. But here's what makes this one different from just another complaint piece. Her team actually built something to prove the alternative works. It's called FHIBE, a dataset collected with real, actual participant consent instead of scraping.
So not a policy paper, a working proof of concept.
Right. And she's honest about why it's not catching on faster. Consensual data collection is slower and more expensive than scraping. And companies that are used to moving fast don't want that friction, even when they know the scraped version is legally shakier. Okay, does a proof of concept data collection like this ever get adopted industry-wide? Or does it just stay a niche case study?
Oh, that's a good question. Something like FHIBE, or Fair Human-Centric Image Benchmark, it's a great prototype for ensuring a more diverse collection and ensuring that audience participation is noted rather than assumed. But whether it gets adopted industry-wide or stays niche is very dependent on the companies using it. Because do companies want to put out those extra resources? Do they want to spend that extra money? Do they want to spend that extra time making sure that they have consensual participation? Or would they rather just stay with what they know and worry about any of the backlash that comes later?
Yeah, companies are cutting costs a lot already, making multiple roles into one role. AI isn't cheap to use, and they're all wanting to use it. A lot of companies probably wouldn't, like you mentioned, put the money into it. I don't know what might drive a company to do it over another, but just seems like it's kind of out there for the bigger, more wealthier companies that might want to be a part of it.
Alex Xiang says models trained on scraped data may reinforce discriminatory patterns, amplify privacy violations, and produce errors that disproportionately affect marginalized groups. This is something we should really consider, because if her system is preventing this, don't we all want this as a whole? If we're trying to move more towards equity, inclusion, diversity, we need to set up systems that naturally implement these rather than trying so hard to train on these. They need to become normal factors.
But I think it's a push in the right direction to make things better.
One thing I would like to bring up is the targeted audience paradox. So you were still, for something like the FHIBE, it's still going to have a target audience because there's still going to be people that would participate, and they are going to be a specific group of people. So while you're trying to expand your diversity with the responses you get and the training you get, you're still going to have a targeted audience. So it's still going to be somewhat limited because only a certain type of people are going to consent to this.
True.
It may be a wider variety than you would scrape from if you're scraping from only certain platforms, but it still could end up being paradoxically the same issue that it's trying to prevent. But I do agree 100% it's a push in the right direction. Okay, so two different fixes, same underlying fracture. A registry with no teeth on one side and a dataset built the hard way on the other.
Consent keeps showing up as the thing everyone agrees on in principle, and nobody's built the enforcement for yet.
And that's the thread we're pulling on next, whether it's fixable from where you're sitting or only where the industry is.
The work tells a story. So do the people behind it. This is Empath. Step back, look again. What changes when the perspective shifts? This is Perspective Reset.
There's something I keep circling back to before we close, because I think it's the point of today, more than any other single stat we covered.
Go ahead.
Every fix we talked about today, the consent registry, the training data clauses, the photographer letter, the FHIBE, they're all reactions. They're all someone noticing after the fact that their permission was never actually asked for, and then building something to try to catch up.
Which is a strange position to build a career from. Constantly proving ownership of something that should have been assumed yours in the first place.
That's exactly it. And I think that's the part that's easy to miss when you're just tracking the news cycle of this. It's not really an AI story. It's an old story wearing new clothes. Creative people have always had to fight to prove a piece of work, a likeness, an idea, actually belonged to them. AI didn't invent the fight. It just multiplied how often you have to have it.
And made the other side faster than you.
Yeah, which is why it makes it genuinely hard right now. Not that the fight is new, but that the pace has changed and most people's contracts and habits didn't change with it.
It's funny, in Magic, this exact tension has always existed, just at a smaller scale. A trick only works once you've protected the method behind it. The moment the method's out, the trick's gone, permanently, and it's gone for every magician who ever wanted to use it after you. So the whole culture around it is built on protecting the thing before it's ever performed in public, not after. Respecting the magician's code so that it helps and protects all magicians is the responsibility each magician has to protect their craft.
Which is exactly the posture this episode's been arguing for. Protect it before it's out in the world, not after.
And nobody in Magic thinks that's paranoid. It's just how the craft survives. I think creative work generally used to have more of that instinct built in, and some of it got lost somewhere along the way. Probably because for a long time, there wasn't much reason to think about it this hard.
It's a strange kind of comfort, actually, framing it that way. This isn't a brand new discipline creatives suddenly have to invent from nothing. It's an old one that got a little soft because the stakes felt lower for a while and now it doesn't.
Which means the muscle's still there, it's just been sitting unused.
That's a much better place to start from than learn an entirely new skill. It's closer to pick the old one back up.
And picking it back up doesn't require a lawyer or a big announcement. It starts as a private habit long before it ever needs to hold up in public.
Which is the kind of thing nobody notices you doing right up until the day it matters more than anything else in the room.
Here's what I keep coming back to from career strategy earlier. The advice wasn't complicated. Say what you actually mean. Don't assume general language covers it.
Which is basically chain of title again. Everything today keeps landing back on the same idea from 3 different angles.
It really does. And I think that's the reassuring part, if there is one. You don't need to solve the entire industry's consent problem to protect yourself. You need your own paperwork to be clean, your own contracts to say the thing outright, your own chain traceable, even if the system around you is a mess.
That's a smaller job than it sounds like at first. It's not fix AI. It's make sure nobody can ever look at your work and find a gap where your name should be.
Which is available to literally anyone listening this week. You don't need a registry with Hollywood backing to add one sentence to your own contract.
That's the takeaway I want people to leave with. Not the panic version of this episode, and not the false comfort version either. The honest one. The infrastructure protecting you industry-wide is genuinely incomplete now. And it might stay that way for a while. But the part of this that's in your hands, your own contracts, your own credit language, your own clarity about what you did and didn't consent to, that part was never waiting on anyone else to build it.
Nobody's coming to write that sentence into your contract for you.
No, but it takes 5 minutes for you to write it yourself. And that's the one piece of this whole conversation that's fully within reach, starting today.
What you can prove you own is the part nobody can take from you. This is Empath.
Here's where we went today. We opened on the panic everyone's whispering about and reframed the real question. Not whether AI is coming for your job, but who actually consented to the data that trained it.
Industry Pulse gave us the numbers underneath that. A global net gain that means nothing to any one person, a creative work bifurcation where commodity rates are collapsing and strategic rates are climbing at the same time, and a risk that isn't landing evenly across who's actually doing the work.
Deep dive got into the mechanics, scraping as the default, opt out as a burden shifted onto the person least equipped to carry it, and a legal landscape that's finally starting to flip toward opt-in, at least in music. And the invisible move, chain of title, the idea that nothing you build holds up without a provable, unbroken claim to it.
Career strategy got tactical. 3 things every contract needs now: a training prohibition, coverage across the full chain of custody, and credit protection. Plus, knowing the union standards already sitting there for anyone in entertainment specifically.
Industry Voice gave us 2 live examples of exactly this fight. A consent registry with real backing and zero enforcement, and a dataset built the hard way with actual consent to prove the alternative is possible.
And Perspective Reset brought it back to the individual. You can't fix the industry's consent problem this week. You can make sure your own chain is clean.
Okay, if you take one thing from today, consent isn't a feature you bolt on after the fact. It's infrastructure. And right now, most of it doesn't have teeth, but your own chain of title can.
Put it in writing. Don't assume anyone else is going to protect it for you.
And that goes for whichever discipline you're in. This isn't a film industry problem, or a photography problem, or a music problem. It's the same fix, wearing a different contract template depending on where you work.
Same fix, different letterhead.
Exactly. Next week, we're going somewhere that's been sitting in the back half of our conversations this season without us saying it outright.
Skill atrophy. What happens when a whole generation of creatives grows up leaning on generation tools so hard they never build the underlying hand skill?
The person running the same prompt 20 times instead of just learning to comp it themselves.
Basically, are we raising a generation of autopilots without meaning to?
Oh,
What? It's the right word. Somebody was always going to have to say it out loud eventually. And not the ones posting Ghibli-styled selfies for a laugh, the quieter version. Someone who never actually built the hand skill underneath the tool at all.
yeah, I guess it kind of is. And that's the real question. That connects straight back to everything we covered this week. If the underlying training data has a consent problem, and now the underlying skill development might have one too, that's 2 generations of the same conversation stacking on top of each other. We'll get into it next week.
If you have questions you want us to address or topics you'd like us to cover, send them in. We read everything.
New episodes drop every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Empath.
Feel the creativity.
The path gets clearer 1 week at a time. This is Empath.
Empath is a partner podcast of Neon Alchemy BV. Story is how companies become human. We handle that part.